System riding to the core. Yeah. Reppin' in the city left.
Today is Sunday, September 22nd. I am Amin TMK for Inner City Left, alongside the co-founders of Inner City Left, my Brody, Emoji Lil Tinky Sumler, and the ghost in the shell, Keita DeMuscle. Happy Sunday to y'all. How are you doing?
I mean, it's great. It's great, World War III is escalating. I ate a delicious dinner last night. I'm going to appreciate the leaves that are turning and hopefully not have to look forward to pending nuclear war.
Inner City Left, where you get that Dickensian perspective, the best of times.
It was the worst of times.
And the bad news is, they bombed this thing. It was terrible. And the good news, I have a delicious dinner. I mean, this is the muscle right now, and she's not wrong.
Yeah, I love it. I'm so glad we're all in a good space, despite like you said, muscle, just a horrific time to be alive. I like it when we get together because we can go in depth on some things. I thought it would be great to, talk about like the American education system. We got the kids going back to school now. And they're out and about, and you always kind of, it's always a wake up when you're not going to school and it's the summertime and you're just used to seeing the kids everywhere. And then, it kind of goes back to adults outside. And, I just kind of thought about, let's talk about it. Let's talk about our experiences. Let's talk about the system at large, and let's talk about, everything in general, because not only will we talk about our education histories, y'all are both, students have gone to universities. I was an artist for a long time. I performed at universities. We also teach at the high school level, teach at the college level. So I think we're pretty qualified to talk about this. So I'm going to say this. I'm going to let y'all react to it. 13% of K through 12 students give an A grade to their school, 13%. And 1/4 of students in K through 12 schools are now chronically absent. That's 1 in 4 students. When I was growing up, I had a big issue with truancy. I didn't like going to school. I didn't like staying at school. It was very difficult to get up that early. We were just talking about homework the other day. What do you feel like is why are these numbers here? Why do 1/4 of kids chronically absent and so many more just so upset with their education? Now, lady, either one of you, Muscle, why don't you go ahead first?
Kids are filled with so much possibility. If anybody older, like, we have so much to learn from the full breadth of humanity. And I feel like something that kids learn that absolutely the United States pushes out of them as soon as it possibly can, tries to make them move their boundaries and lines on what's acceptable, is that this shit ain't right. Kids are savvy about that they understand, like, wait, you told me this. And they interpret it as, especially at younger ages, they interpret it as total truths about the universe. And so they're like, what do you mean there's an exception? Oh, you said that we should feed everybody. Why are you yelling at me because I wanted to feed somebody who's homeless? Like, kids can really tap you into that. So the fact that kids notice that the United States education system is bullshit. And I mean, but we also have to recognize too how it started. Lil Tanky talks about this a long time, that everyone wants to talk about the United States founding. But the education is grounded in that founding too. The Puritans came and said you needed to learn about church, respecting your parents, and being good Christians at the end of the day. And the United States education system was built on that puritanical belief. And sure, it shifted a little bit, but at the end of the day, the United States education system very much wants a certain kind of citizen. And you have to catch that really young. Even think about it, like schooling happens at even younger ages, to where I thought kindergarten was the end of it. And then it was preschool. And now it's like, oh, well, it's pre K daycare at 2 or 3 years old, just because parents don't have the capacity to watch their kids full time.
That's a great point. I'm gonna give it right back to you, Emoja. I just thought it was a great point because when I grew up, I never went to preschool, and I'm not saying that maybe it was good, maybe it was bad. I don't know, but I also had like a stay at home mom, so like I could just enjoy time with my mom, and I couldn't imagine having any better experience than that. Emoja, why do you think that 25% of kids are chronically not there? I mean, what's going on?
So let me give a couple of precursors. One thing I would like to say is I, in spite of it all, I matriculated, right? I feel like I was never meant to. Like, I actually have a master's degree. You know what I'm saying? I have a terminal degree in a field that I studied and I went out and had a whole career in. But it was adversarial, right? It was every step of the way. It was adversarial. It was adversarial in college. My professors didn't look like me. They didn't read what I was reading. They didn't respect the people that I respected. They weren't brilliant people. And the further I go back, the worse that gets, right? Like grad school, I was actively in opposition to the professors that were in my field. And they were the first ones, oh, but you got to go through, change the system from the inside. High school, I remember going to my guidance counselor after I took my SATs and my ACTs. My scores were really high, and my guidance counselor literally said to me, "But why would a college want you?" Right? Like these are the people who are supposed to be prepping you and getting you fired up to go through this whole shit. Like that was my experience. Now I do want to say, as the oldest person in our cohort, as the Gen Xer, you know, just watching this whole evolution, of what school looks like and how school is practiced now. I think a great example of fiction that represents reality in some type of level would be The Breakfast Club, right? Great Gen X high school story. Guys get in trouble, the principal comes out and he's like, yeah, you guys are going to serve detention, right? And they actually show up. This is funny because it's actually a punchline in a Kevin Smith movie. He's like, man, Breakfast Club, you're talking about the movie where the kids get in trouble and actually show up for detention on a Saturday. And it goes to the point of what you're saying now, right? The kids now, they realize there really aren't many things that the school can do. And the school doesn't really care because the school is paid, right? Whereas what would have happened maybe in my gen is the kid would have just been expelled, right? They don't do that now because they want those kids on the roster so they can continue to get the tax benefit of saying this many students go to the school, even when in reality, it's never been that many. It's maybe that many on the first day of school, and 3 weeks after school begins, it's never even 80% of that again. I don't know though. Maybe also the empire is losing its message, right? Because like again, as a Gen Xer is like go to college, you're gonna be rich, right? Gen X is kind of the end of that, right? Like because I gotta say, Bill Gates was older than me. And the thing that we all talked about on his rise was like, damn, the dude didn't even get his degree. Like he went to Harvard and left and became a billionaire, right? And it's only continued to get more like that as education has continued. But I would also say, in many ways, as you say, it's an outcrop of what they want from us, right? We don't see it as something that really reflects what's happening as far as like the job market goes. Like a kid could know as early as 8 years old, I really want to do music. I really do. I want to sing. I want to learn how to write songs, you know, and I want to know how to mix. What public school in America could teach that, right? Like you might really know. You might could take a music class, and you're gonna be playing an instrument, probably a recorder. You know what I'm saying? But you might already be a kid that's like, "Oh, I need access to keyboards. I need access to soundboards. I need to know how to set up sound dampening. I need to really be able to, I need to be studying the software that's engaged with, well, like, how do we make music today? Right? There's no public school that can teach these things. And what it does is it has a system of one size fits all. But there's three sizes, right? There's the Votech track, which is essentially the kids that they don't think you're gonna be much of anything. You're either too deep from the hood or you're from the trailer, and they're like, all right, well, let's go ahead and give them some shop and get them out of here. The regular kid track, which is like, okay, let's just get them the regular degree. And then the track that they nominally care about, the college, the GT track. The kids are gonna, and those are the only kids that they seem to care about, you know. But again, even as a GT kid, I didn't get love. All they wanted from me was for me to make the school have great grades.
I would also, the structure of the education system does not really support children at all. There's been so many scholarly studies and research done on what is the best circadian rhythm for kids, and finding out that they have to wake up sometimes as early as 7 a.m. As a mean TMK, like you've pointed out before, if you have any extracurricular activities, you might be getting up as early as 5 or 6 a.m. And the research posits that, like, actually, this is incredibly disruptive to a child's circadian rhythm, particularly when they're in their growing stages. We don't allow them to set their schedule. That we say you have to be here at this time. If you're not, then you'll be punished. And who does that support? As Tanky pointed out, it definitely doesn't support kids who have any type of disability, whether that's cognitive, physical, or any mental disabilities as well. Like that, they have to be forced to stay in a school. And then when we think about it, how much that has worsened, because COVID, the research is revealing, is attacking sometimes people's immune systems in many ways, that it is attacking their cognitive ability and giving them chronic illnesses that we can't even quite capture because COVID's being ignored. And how many of those kids were forced to go to school anyway, even though they were ill. I even think about this happening where my parents were the generation, my mom was the generation that said, oh, if your kid has chicken pox, send them to school because all the kids need to catch it. And how insane that is to me now, looking back, to be like, why did I have to go to school? And chicken pox was horrendous. But I was like, oh, I have to make myself sick in order to be tough. And how kids are forced to keep going regardless. And if you have any sort of disabilities that get exacerbated by that kind of school scheduling, we're breaking kids' bodies and then funneling them out of the system. Like, oh, well, that kid was just naturally a failure, rather than saying, like, our society needs these types of citizens. And so then we need to provide these types of supports in order to get these citizens. But we all know education across the United States has been defunded on a national level. This is why we see an increase in charter schools and private schooling, because they didn't want public education to have it. That the Bush administration pushed this no child left behind bullshit, which absolutely eroded critical thinking on a massive scale. That education in the United States in many ways wasn't even open to everybody. It's not even open to every single white person, because the assumption was only at this level, at these private schools or at these church schools, could people get the track that they needed to excel, and everybody else just needed to work. That was their only function in American society.
You hear about the Baltimore school system not having air conditioning and 95-degree weather, no books. DC has a storied history of a falling apart education system. I know y'all come from, different areas of the South, whether it be Arkansas or New Orleans, or, it just seems like everywhere you go, it's pretty consistent. I mean, there's some areas in DC where the student population is 100% Black. And I wanted to ask this, because it seems like, we this conversation around segregation popped up when the owner of the Dallas Cowboys was seen in the photo of the Little Rock. Maybe you can speak to this more, but the integration in the school system there. And, here we are still with some schools that are 100% black or 100% white. It kind of had this idea that, well, everyone was supposed to be funded properly or funded the exact same, but that is just not happening. It's kind of like that thing we always talk about was like, oh, well, it happened back then, but it's actually still happening now. And it seems like it's just what the norm is going to be. Jump in. Anybody can jump in.
To me, it goes back to the great principle of America. Who all's coming, right? It's not a secret that the most progressive parts of America are the parts where the population is overwhelmingly white. And it's not that white people are more progressive, it's that progressive legislation has a chance to succeed. The government and people that fund the government they have less problems with social programs so long as they go to, it sounds controversial, but this is real. The acting president of the United States of America is a great example of that. This is a person that didn't want his kids going to a racialized jungle, right?
Wow, the president of the United States currently.
President of the current, we're not talking about Donald Trump, right? So like these things continue to happen. Essentially, the moment desegregation happened, America stopped investing in public schools. If black people get to go, we'll break this whole thing. And this is to the detriment of everybody because all of these people live here, right? All of these people have an American experience to share and things to learn about each other. Instead, multiculturalism has always been seen as an attack on whiteness. And so it attacks back. Like you said, it creates charter schools. It creates parochial schools. It creates private schools. And a lot of these places are getting public money. Look, if you don't want your kids around black people, it's not fine, but it's not me to tell you what you do with your kids. But you shouldn't get public money for that. You just shouldn't. That's it. If you and your group of rich friends can make a school that doesn't require any government money, then fine, do that. That's okay with my praxis. You know what I'm saying? It's just when you want to be segregationist, but still you want to tap into the public funds, that's a problem. And so many of these things continue. Like I think also though, and this is a question I would ask all of you guys, what is the great motivator to go, right? Like you go because you have to go. But like, was there ever a time in your life where like you were excited to go to school? Like you just could not wait. And I'm not talking about to see your friends, right? But like, oh my God, this teacher is so good. I can't wait to learn from this person. Like I got a little bit of that in college. You know what I'm saying? You get disavowed of that too, though, right? But I mean, in high school and in primary education, it's nothing like that. The people that are there, even the ones that mean well, they're not subject matter experts. They're very rarely subject matter experts. It's more important if you want to become a teacher to learn the Western art of teaching than any particular subject that you would in fact be teaching. And that's problematic because it assumes there's only one way to teach, that people only learn in pretty much one way. I mean, again, in college, this was something I ran to all the time. I had professors who taught how to teach creative writing, right? How to teach a writing workshop. And I'm like, I've done this professionally for decades. You know what I'm saying? Like I've done this. I don't use this methodology and I am able to get very good outputs from the people that I work with, consistently creative work that outperforms these models that you're teaching, right? And they just don't know how to engage with that. They know how to teach in this style and they expect students to respond in that style, but it didn't work for me. I was a genius level student and I was making terrible grades because I hated the way that the knowledge was brought to me and the way that I had to react with the knowledge, which was to say to regurgitate, not to question, not to, add any type of depth to anything. I remember in GT, European history, which I had to take when I moved to Arkansas, because they didn't have the class that I had when I was in New Orleans, which was GT World History, right? So I'm already going to a school that doesn't even have the offering from this that's coming from the school that I had, and they're putting me straight into this class, right? And the first sentence of the AP World History book was, and this is a study of the greatest, most powerful continent the world has ever known in the history of humanity. I'm like, the fuck? This is I immediately don't jive with this. It's a fucking radical ass black kid. I'm like, this is some bullshit, right? But the test is what's in the book. And if that's the first sentence of the book, what the fuck do you think the rest of the book is? Like, how do you think they're gonna cover, Toussaint L'Ouverture and the Haitian Revolution, right?
See, that was me when they were teaching the section on the Korean War, and I was like, hold up. The information you have is incorrect. And then, of course, and I think like this is what children deal with, and they have been trying to express in so many different ways. But first, as Tanky pointed out, I have moved a lot across the United States. Education is not standardized. It is up to that locality. In some cases, the county, if you're really lucky, at a state level, but it is up to the locality to determine what is the most important thing to teach children within that district. And so it is not standardized. I have had to move to so many schools where it felt like I was starting over because it wasn't standardized and they didn't know how to transfer some of the classes and things that I learned already into this new standard. And whose fault was that? Apparently it was mine, where I was like, I'm not part of this system. But I think the other part of it too that kids often recognize is that there is a discouragement of learning in the American education system. They don't want you to learn, they want you to repeat. And kids know this very, very early, where it was like, well, this is what I learned. And I mean, how that excitement for learning also gets killed, because like when I was really young, I would raise my hand because that was what we were supposed to do. If you didn't know the answers, you were supposed to ask. And I raised my hand and the other kids made fun of me, but also the teacher themselves made fun of me. You should have read it. Yeah, I read it, but I don't understand it. So like I'm trying to ask questions so I can understand. And what my education upbringing was this is a place where you have to memorize, but also, why didn't you come with all of the answers? So for me, it was like, I'm not going to be embarrassed in class. I'm going to read. And I read the book and I loved going to the library. So I would read all of those books. And I mean, once you gave me the internet many years later, it was like, oh, the whole world has opened to me. So then when I would bring that knowledge, the teacher's like, that's not what I taught you. Okay, but you told me to come with knowledge already. And I came with that knowledge from this book I read. I read the encyclopedia. I read this. I read this. You told me to read. I have the sources to cite, and how teachers would be like insubordinate. She's just not a team player. Like they don't want to do this work. And I'm like, you told me that I had to do this. I mean, even for Black History Month, where we had to do an essay, and I picked somebody that was not on their pre-prescribed list because it was like, hey, here's a recommended list if apparently you don't know any Black people. So here's your pre-prescribed list. You know who's on it: Rosa Parks, Martin Luther King. And I was like, well, I don't need that list because I've been reading a lot. There's a whole bunch of people that I learned about. Wrote my whole essay, gave it to the teacher, and she's like, it's not on the list. And she was like, you made it up. I'm like, literally, I can pull the library books in here telling you I didn't make it up. I cited my sources like you asked me to. And I did a breakdown of somebody that I think should be a Black, like, why am I getting punished for this? And I got in trouble. They had to call my mom. And of course, she's upset. And it's like, well, why won't you learn? And of course, some of my educational pressures came from the fact that I did grow up in a racist upbringing that was like, because you're half Black, you're not as smart as everybody else in school. And so you have to work 3 times as hard. I literally got told this by members of my family who were supposed to be supportive of me. And so I had to go through the education system being like, oh no, it's my fault that I'm not learning. It's my fault. And I mean, what I'm proud of with the kids is like, they recognize at much earlier ages, that's bullshit. And if they're really fortunate, they have other people surrounding them, their community, their friends, maybe some other older adults who are like, yeah, kid, that's bullshit. You should not have to deal with that. You're learning in the ways that you are. This education system is trying to make you do something very specific. And what is that specific? And they're regaining their critical thinking skills that have been denied them for many years, struggling through this system.
And that's my point, right? Like kids stop coming because they feel like the system is, and they're not necessarily wrong, inherently adversarial. Like those people are, y'all know I have a rap song about this. Crystal Stare. I talk about how half the time I felt like the teachers were straight up trying. They knew my home situation was fucked up. They knew I was getting the shit beat out of me as a kid. You know what I'm saying? And they knew, hey, if I send you home to get this test signed, that's an ass whooping. So, teacher, you didn't hit me, but you did something that ensured I was going to get hit. You knew, half the time they did it. Especially man in the deep South, where like corporal punishment, at least when I was in school, was something that still happened. You know what I'm saying? It's like I'm not going to hit you, but I'm going to make sure you get hit. And the
Oh,
coach
my
might still hit
generation
you.
too. Yep. Where they always threatened it, like, hey, corporal punishment is allowed in the school. What kind
You trying to fight me,
of yeah. Yeah. I mean, there were a couple teachers that it was like, I will throw hands. And
Right.
fulfilling some of those stereotypes.
I want to
And
ask a. Yeah, I'll step in and just. I just have another question. About this really. As we know that, we watch The Wire. We seen like the truancy rules and people coming and just scoop someone up so they can get paid for that day. You mentioned that. I wanted to talk a little bit about, we talk about the crumbling of the United States, and how that permeates throughout all of its infrastructure, and education is certainly one of those. It's interesting to see that homelessness is a thing that we talk about all the time, and in Washington D.C., youth homelessness is at a very high rate. So what happens is you have kids that are going to school as their like only meal of the day or their only engagement of the day or whatever that may be. That is not something that the school can necessarily handle. You need to have services surrounding that person, because going to school as a homeless person, I mean, a homeless student, it's just a little too difficult for anyone to do. And it seems as if, and we talk about this too with public libraries, because they're one of the last things that have public funding. So it's one of the last few things that are like really working. So you have the DC Public Library really becoming a homeless shelter because there's really nowhere else for people to go. And you have these traditional services, or these traditional government funded services like the library or maybe public transportation or the school system, having to pick up for this crumbling infrastructure and the increase in poverty. I want to ask another question, and I'm going to go back to some stats here. It's a question for both of you. In 2010, high school and university enrollments were at an all-time high. That has gone down every single year in the last 13 years. I think that people are seeing that the school debt situation is just insane. Also, we're seeing the crackdown on free speech in colleges and universities. What do you think of when you hear, the enrollment going down every year for the last 13 years? Question for both of you.
I mean, in many ways, I know I talk about COVID a lot, but countless people, and I say countless right now because we do not have accurate numbers about how many people caught COVID and how many people have died from COVID, especially since the United States in the early days of COVID maybe weren't sure, but given the track record of this country and the way it disseminates critical information, we have to assume we're hiding in many ways. Um, so we don't have the clear numbers. And I don't know why, like, I know why actually, because it is very difficult to say, hey, the United States of America murdered this many children. But we see these global statistics, or we see even these statistics state by state in the United States, and I have to call back to that. Then the other thing is that, I mean, TMK, some of these rates go down because like children are dying. They are dying from lack of access to healthcare, lack of access to food, lack of access to potable water at this rate. When we're finding out that all of our pipes in countries across the United States are poisoned essentially, and giving us water that is not necessarily clean and drinkable, not to say least of which there are companies and corporations who are trying to privatize the very water that we have, and they are intentionally poisoning the ground well. And that kids need stability. What stability has this country dared to provide them so that they do feel comfortable going to an educational system for 8+ hours a day? It's not to have fun with their friends, apparently. It's not to connect with other kids and adults where they can have these nice, deep discussions. So, of course, kids aren't inclined to go. I've definitely been a kid who was like, and this is a kid, and I was a kid who had a consistent attendance out of necessity so that my ass wouldn't get beat. But even I found opportunities to be like, "Ooh, let me do the math. So, okay, I have to go to school this many times. They allow this 5 absences. These are the 5 absences these are the 4 absences that I'm going to take throughout the year." And I would skip a class in order to do it. And because like kids need that agency to determine their own fate, we give them so little control in the United States to have agency over themselves that we tell them you belong to your parents. And if you don't belong to your parents, then you belong to society. We will not give you any support or legal restrictions, but we will absolutely use you as a political hammer to make our political opponents do what we want. That we say, oh, we're protecting the kids, we're protecting the kids. And yet, what has it gotten us? Reduced education, reduced access to healthcare at early ages, where it is absolutely critical from the moment they're born. I mean, honestly, through the rest of their lives, but from the moment they're born, that access to healthcare is already inaccessible. If you're a Latina mom, if you're a Black mom, if you're an Asian mom in the United States, you have a higher rate of maternal deaths before you're even born. And then we tell this child, like, oh, yeah, you have to keep going. So I honestly, I think there's lots of reasons, but I think at the end of the day, too, we have to talk to the people who this absolutely affects. And adults in the United States don't do that. They don't talk to kids, they talk down to kids. They don't talk with kids and say, hey, how can we make this better for you? Because then that would open up things that, of course, the United States doesn't want us to question about the way we function as an empire and as a global threat in many ways to so many other people's well-being, that we need this inequity in large swaths of the country. And if you aren't inequitable, we need you to support the empire at all costs. But that we don't make it easy. And then property taxes determine, like, hey, do you even have access to a good school? We're not even going to pay for you to get to school, but you have to figure out how to get there. No public transportation, even the bus system these days. Because when I lived in like the rural South, of course, we took a bus system, but again, you'd have to be up so freaking early in the morning. You miss the bus, you don't want to tell your parents, they're going to get mad at you. But like, what do? Do you walk for an hour? Do you try to figure out, hopefully, maybe a friend, if you're 16 or up, then maybe a friend will come swoop you. But like getting to school itself is hard for many of these kids. And at what point do you just say, like, I give up? As Tanky said, because what future? I do all of this and I get nothing. I get more debt. I get more poverty. I get worse access to employment. Nah, I'm good.
And knowledge is gatekept to the point of irrelevancy, right? Like this is the biggest. If I had to say what is the single biggest flaw of the American education system, stuff has to be vetted and 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 made sure this isn't offensive and that isn't offensive, until the time that what you come up with is this byproduct that doesn't resemble anything that looks like the truth, right? I mean, was it Houston Mifflin, whatever their name was, the Texas publisher, maybe a decade ago, that was talking about African migrants came to the American South as a migrant workforce because they couldn't bring themselves to say they were trafficked as human property, right? By the, you know what I'm saying? So like, you can't say that And so by the time you get to something that's non-offensive enough to the people that decide what can be taught, it doesn't resemble the truth. I'll say another thing. I think about how many schools, because they're forced to use these books that at best are 3 to 5 years out of date. By the time they're brand new in the school, they're 3 to 5 years out of date. When the reality is half these schools could be teaching their stuff directly from the internet and saving themselves a ton of money. You know, think about geography, right? Geography was one of the most boring classes I ever had. Think about how much better it will be if schools could just go to geography now on YouTube, right? But half of these schools don't even allow YouTube access because, oh no, there might be something offensive. Like, you can't even see naked bodies on YouTube. So, like, already, you know what I'm saying? It's like, why are you gatekeeping using YouTube as a resource, especially when it's relatively inexpensive? And from there, they have even more specific ones. What's some of those? There are a million services
Oh,
where, like,
there's so I mean the level of surveillance on children, which I think
well,
you're talking
that's a
about,
whole
Tinky, is
nother thing.
also
But I meant
yeah.
like specialty services from the YouTube, like
And
what
Oh,
was it?
YouTube
YouTube
itself got
Kids and
YouTube
YouTube.
Kids and YouTube Education, all those other things. Yeah, they're right
Right.
there. Not to mention several institutions or several large pages will have classroom friendly videos as well. You know, if you're looking for something like that, and we know the reason why.
Technological. The future is technological, right? Instead of having these kids have to have a pen and paper every day and carry all of these books, they should be able to use the smartphones that they already have, right? And not ostracized for inventing how they what their approach to education is. I mean, if I gotta say, and this was something I was able to do in college, and it never even dawned on me because it would have never been something I could do in public schools. I used to record the whole lecture. I'm gonna go in on my laptop. This is Monday's recording. I'm listening to everything the professor says. There's no way you could just whip open your laptop and record these settings in schools now, or whip out your phone. It's going to become an immediate confrontation between you and the teacher, and or you and administration. You're being disrespectful. I'm literally just got my phone out. It helps me learn better. I'm recording what you're saying. I'm videotaping what you're saying. You know what
But
I'm saying?
also how the education system discourages different types of learning. At this
Right.
rate, in 2024, enough scholarly articles and research has been done in the United States alone that says not every child learns at the same rate, at the same age, in the same exact manner. That this lecture style where a teacher stands up for 8 freaking hours a day, just teacher after teacher talking at you, is not conducive to learning, as Tanky talks about. And yet we force kids into these environments that are not conducive to their learning. We tell them, like, hey, it's not only is this not conducive to your learning, if you try to find any ways to learn, you will be punished. If you try to figure this out in ways that we didn't anticipate, you will be punished. And at the end of the day, we have to ask ourselves, how does this serve the United States empire? And we can
Yeah,
see it.
I think it's important to just say here, that was a great point. 100 US students take 112 mandatory standardized tests from K through 12. 112. That's how many they take. So that's to let you know, like, these are I feel like this was the Bush era, right? Standardize everything.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, right. Even though education is not a standardized experience, and it shouldn't be because kids need to learn different things, right? But I would just go on to say though, as a person that teaches in schools, right? What is two things that we have to establish immediately. One, I actually am an expert in this, right? Because kids don't care until you can prove, then you whip out, this is me nominated for a Grammy. Oh, now the kids bug-eyed, like, oh, they really do know what they're doing, right? And two, I'm not like them, right? Which they may or may not believe because it's all they've ever had, right? And so, like, they don't, just to my earlier point, the kids don't feel like you're on their side, right? And most of the time, if we're being honest with ourselves, we're not. I've been in schools where kids were literally suspended for wearing mismatched socks. I mean, can you think of all the reasons why a kid might wear mismatched socks? Up to and including Simply, it's a fashion statement. They might want to do this in a country that's supposed to celebrate freedom of expression and freedom of speech. How is a child's sock choice, right, a disciplinary action?
Oh, and don't get me started on school uniforms that I have seen kids fight against, and it still passes in their school. And so kids get to see really early on, like, what is this system meant to do? And some kids are like, you know what, I can't fight the system, start flowing right into it. Some other kids who will be like, I have to keep fighting this because this isn't right. And we've seen that. And we've also seen what happens to them. That we talk about how I mean, even before universities started getting all of these munitions in order to stop these protests, but even in schools as young as an elementary age, where politicians were literally advocating, we'll just give teachers guns and that'll be fine. Kids are under so much pressure. I would say that even that kids in the United States today have to deal with so much gun violence on a scale that is terrifying, and we let that number go up every single year. That we're
Yeah,
like,
we do,
well,
right?
we tried our best.
We play a little bit of security theater. I was sitting there thinking about my red shirt, my flaming red shirt, which I would never be able to wear in a Little Rock high school, at least when I was coming up. Because in Little Rock, Arkansas, they bang it. I mean, they bout it,
Oh my
right?
God. I remember because in class, I was in class once, and everybody who was wearing a red sports jacket had to go to the principal's. We found out later, oh, everybody thought they were Bloods. It was like, what? These
And,
white kids were
and
Bloods.
let's
Are
talk
y'all
about too,
serious
right?
right now?
Let's talk about the elevation of the conversation of gangs, because
Mhm,
that was ostensibly the reason why these teachers and these security guards were given guns. We got to
mhm.
do something about the gangs. When has American schools not had gangs? You know,
Well,
I
there's
mean,
that.
but now that gangs are associated with black people, the
Mhm.
assumption is it's all
In Greece,
murder.
it was all good, right?
Greece, it was all good, buddy, and happy days. You know what I'm saying? All of these, it's always been gangs. West Side Story. Oh, we the Jets. Oh,
Classic.
we the Sharks. When in American
Knife
school,
fighting,
you know what I'm saying? You know, oh man, what was that? Rebel Without a Cause. I mean, I
right?
I just don't know
Bodies on the ground, death, all
but
white boys. Yeah,
gangs mean
yeah.
black people and they're dangerous, and teachers, they need AR-15. I mean, it's like,
Well, yeah, they need security guards. And then, oh, well, we need security points because there aren't enough security guards against all these crazy students with knives. Yeah, I remember it because it was like, I'm not walking through that. Like, why am I walking through a metal detector to get to class? I don't want to deal with this
you
bullshit.
saying off the rip, you think I'm a criminal. I mean, off the rip, before my school even my day begins, you pat me down like I'm about to get booked. I
Oh,
mean,
and then
it's
kids who had to wear
atmosphere.
clear backpacks. You talk about security theater. What do you, first of all, and then it was clear backpacks. And then it turned into, because this happened to my niece, where I'm like, why are you carrying 80 pounds of books? And she's like, I don't have enough time to go to my locker. And actually, I'm not allowed to go to my locker unless it's in the morning or the evening. And I'm like, what the fuck is the point of lockers? It's supposed to spare you from these books. We already got the clear backpacks. Why are they making you do this? And then it's like, okay, let me take a breath. This is not, I can't take it out on my niece. I really have to take it out on the system.
This is my last question. I think we've been touching on this, but this idea that kids have to go to school from early in the morning till mid afternoon. They may have some sort of extracurricular activity in theater or debate team or sports. Then they have homework to do, and they got to wake up and do it again Monday through Friday. And it sort of becomes this conditioning for jumping into the working class, which will have long hours. Your emails are going to be, got to answer your email at 6:45 at dinner time, because that's how you work in today's society. And it seems like it's difficult for most students to reach that level because it doesn't seem as if they are working towards something. And I think that that is sort of breaking down the average American student. I know I dealt with it. Just react to that, like the workload being so strenuous to simulate what it's going to be getting exploited in American capitalism. Either question for either one of you.
It creates violence in the household for one. I take I just see both of y'all nodding. So we've all been okay. I didn't do my homework because I was tired after all of these activities and extracurriculars and GT classes, or you know what? I didn't fucking feel like doing homework, and you never have that option. And in my household, it was I learned pretty quickly through violence that okay, you know what? I need to get my homework done, and so what I did, and it still got me in trouble, was I started doing homework during other classes because I'm like, this is bullshit. I'm already in class for 8 hours a day, and I have extracurricular activities. I'm not spending my whole night doing homework. And I know from seeing my niece and other children, homework is even worse today. I would have a couple of assignment sheets, and now they have to do whole essays and reading and writing and mathematical formulas.
And I would just say this is in keeping with the American educational system not even being in line with the corporate office jobs that they're supposedly preparing us for. Because what you're talking about is knowing how to delegate and how to break down a project and work on it in garbage time and how to be efficient. Efficiency is what you're really learning when you're talking about I did my homework in other classes so I can be done, right? Being more efficient is supposed to be the great call sign of American capitalism. For me, the other thing about homework was it was just something to prove that I would do what they told me to do. That's that to me was never enough of a motivator. Like for me, I would do my homework if I didn't understand it, right? Because it's like I really need to. I'm struggling with this algebra. I need to do these equations and try to work it out, right? If I understood it, it's like, why am I doing this? This is busy work. I'm gonna max the test, and I would, right? And that's not reflective of my grades at all, because so much of your grade is homework is they're grading you on will you do what we tell you to do, right? And for me, it was no. The test is do you know the subject material? And for me, it was yes. So I never had great grades because there's so much homework and it's weighted so favorably in response to like the tests and such that even when I would max the tests, I would never have great grades, And so like they're already seeing this isn't a person necessarily that we want to pass through the educational service, and those kind of things where it's like, I would say the other thing is, Keto, what you were talking about, what the question was, what say again, Dalal, what was the second part of your question?
I was just saying, like, what is sort of the response for, students who are basically being treated like workers with this incredible workload after hours, which is like getting emails after work, and they're just sort of always, yeah.
You were talking about there was also a financial cost, right? I was thinking about when I would have to do science projects, right? And I was damn good at science. I was actually a really, really promising young student as it related to that. Quiet as kept. I went to college in undergrad on a physics fucking scholarship, which quickly became something else. Any rate. But the thing is, I never wanted to bring up science fairs to my mom because I knew we was always some broke motherfuckers. You know what I'm saying? So like all the shit I need to make the experiment the way. First of all, if I ask for this shit, I'm probably gonna get told no. And so now when am I bringing it up? Now it's an emergency. You know what I'm saying? It's like, oh, the science project is due a week from now, or God forbid tomorrow, and I got to do something. So now you go to your mom or your dad, and they're pissed that you waited so long. When the reality is, they never had the money to give it to you. If you would have gave them a month, if you would have gave them, if you would have told them at the beginning of the semester, this is what I got to do. Either you got it or you don't. And when I'm looking at us getting eviction notices and motherfucking, mom and dad fighting over the electric bill, how they gonna be able to help me do a titration experiment in chemistry. Like, how they gonna be able to do that? You know what I'm saying?
Right. But
Reasonably.
that also shows like how inequitable the education system is. If the United States says that education is important and that Tanky learning this aspect of science is important, and yet gave him none of the tools in which to do that. All they gave him was homework and stress and then more violence at home. I even think about that what is a critical aspect that a country needs to teach its citizens? One of the things that stands out in my mind is the country absolutely owes it to its citizens to tell them, how do you thrive in our country? How do you thrive in the cultural society that we have built here? And we don't learn that. We're told education is important, and yet it's defunded. We're told you have to follow the law, and yet we're not taught any laws except obey your parents and listen to authority figures. We're
And
not taught
decency.
that. And
Decency
yeah,
becomes the law, right? Like, because right now, this whole workshop that essentially we're doing on the ways to fix the educational system, it can never be played in almost any school because, oh my God, they said fuck in there, right? And like, we're talking about kids that are having babies,
look,
right?
I grew up on a military base. Kids as young as 3 years old were saying cockfucker. Okay.
They're cursing, kids curse. It
They
doesn't
curse.
right. But it makes the adults uncomfortable. And because the adults are uncomfortable, the kids, we have to act like kids don't do this, right? And so like now this is ruled as indecent. Like the adults won't make room for the students as to exist as they are.
Yes, and to figure out what they want to learn. To either learn first, primarily, how do you thrive in the society and culture and community that we have built here under these structures and these laws? And then, secondly, how do you find your interests? We're never taught that in school. I feel like, at least for me personally, I went through every grade, people asking me, what do you want to be? What do you want to be? And I'm like, I don't know. I don't care. I don't even think about the future like that for me, except I think there's maybe flying cars, but only because other people told me there were flying cars, and how we're kind of forced into this. And then it's like, well, you have to decide. But at no point did or how about this? I had a lot of interests as a kid, and every single one of them got crushed under the education system. I like to draw. Well, you won't make any money of that. So you can do a hobby. So I stopped drawing. Oh, I like to read. Well, what job's going to let you just read all day? Okay. Now, fortunately, I got back to reading and still enjoy it. But like how all of the, I want to be a scientist. I want to be a physicist. Okay. Well, do you have the titration machines and the microscopes? They're going to cost $2,000. And we crush that in kids to say, like, actually, you can be anything, but you have to be what society wants you to be. Actually, we just need you to just fit into this cog. And people know it. People try to find their interests in many ways. And this is why we're exhausted by the system. And how does it fuel the American empire at the end of the day? And crushing critical thinking is absolutely a tool of empire.
Great discussion. I'm always appreciative when we're all three together. I think there was some great perspectives today. I want to give a shout out to our podcast listeners. We're available everywhere you find podcasts, Apple Podcasts, Spotify, iHeartRadio, Player FM. You can always check us up on our Podbean, innercityleft.com. You can also show us some love on our Patreon. Information below, patreon.com/innercityleft. Want to give a shout out to our patrons because we love them. Turn Leftist, Dubsy22, Nicole Hedges, Jake Willard 94, No Ground, RK, Paula, Lissa, Lauren, Suzette, and Dennis. Y'all the real heroes. Final thoughts from my friends, Katie the Muscle, Moja. What's up?
Just let these kids be these kids, right? I mean, that's the Aristotelian method. It's like meet them where they are and come up with a synthesis of what you have to teach and what they have an aptitude to learn. But a lot of that comes with listening to the kids, which again is difficult to do when you're talking about class sizes of 30 plus, right? The entire American educational system needs to be reimagined. And that doesn't mean split up and siphoned off and, let's find new ways to get money to charter schools. And it doesn't mean that. It means finding a way to listen to the kids, tell you what they want to learn, discovering what they're good at and finding a way to bring that out, and helping them to understand what their options will be in this new world that's coming as you understand it. You know, the jobs that we needed 20 years ago are not the jobs that we need today, but the education is exactly the same.
Yeah, along those lines, yes, absolutely. Also, we do not need punitive measures in the education system. Stop punishing kids for a teacher's inability to teach. Kids want to learn, and we are killing their ability to learn and their excitement for learning and reading because we keep punishing them for wanting to learn and read and experience the world and share their experiences with us. But there have been so many articles too around education policy, particularly in the United States. And I strongly urge folks not just to research the history of education in the United States, like through JSTOR or what, but also to look at the history of education in other countries, because it's manifested very differently. And there's so much that we can learn from that too. Even education from like Native Indigenous peoples. How did they teach their children the critical things that they needed to learn? How did Korea do it? How did the Soviet Union do it? How did the ancient Egyptians do it? Like there's so much knowledge out there that there's no reason where we have to force kids to struggle through a system that makes zero sense.
Yeah, great discussion. For Key to the Muscle, I'm Mojo Lil Tanky Somewhere. I am Amin TMK for Inner City Left. Peace.
System riding to the core. Yeah. Reppin' inner city left.